Part 44. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguanggongzi. Chapter 431. On the branches under the moon, you can occasionally see maids and a few young girls from the Lu family walking around in the courtyard of the deep house. When they meet, they will call out AncientChina, and then hide in the courtyard, secretly watching the beautiful girls from behind the door. The young man in white passed by. The boudoir where Mrs. Lu lived when she was a child was in the back house of the Lu family. It was occupied by girls who had not left the palace and could not go out more than once a year. It's not because of the influence of Neo-Confucianism. The worst possible person for the legitimate daughter of the Jinling Lu family to marry in the future is a wealthy family of the same size. She has the possibility of becoming a queen. For the sake of reputation, she must not let her young lady go crazy on the street like a wild girl. I have to be taken by my elders when I go out, so I have to pay attention to my bearing and appearance since I was a child. Mrs. Lu took Su Buling to a courtyard. When she opened the small door, she saw a delicately decorated embroidery building. The courtyard was clean. Apparently people came to clean it up from time to time. Plants were planted on the courtyard wall near the back alley. There is an osmanthus tree and a swing next to it. After revisiting her old place, Mrs. Lu's eyes showed a little daze. She walked into the courtyard and looked around. She said softly, "It feels smaller. I used to think this courtyard was so big." Su Buling walked behind him and couldn't help but smile as he watched Mrs. Lu spinning around in the yard. Under the bright moonlight, the light was not too dim. Mrs. Lu, wearing a dark green dress, stood in the courtyard. The winter night was slightly cold, her chest rose and fell while breathing, her red lips opened and closed to exhale a faint mist, and her peach cheeks were a little bright red. The eyes under the long eyelashes were slightly raised, looking at Jiu Lu in front of her. Her charming profile was very moving. His hands were still folded on his waist, but he no longer had the dignified temperament of the past, and the naughty temperament of his childhood had not recovered, so he looked a little stupid. Su Buling was originally looking at the yard, but at this time his eyes unconsciously stopped on the side of Mrs. Lu's face, then moved down, along the snow-white neck to some places where he shouldn't look. "I have lived here since I can remember. If I am not allowed to go out every day, I will try my best to escape." Mrs. Lu was completely unaware and walked in the yard with Su Buling. While explaining to Su Buling, she also recalled the past. As he spoke, he walked to the wall, looked around, took out the ladder from behind the old osmanthus tree, and leaned against the wall. "I asked you to secretly get this ladder from somewhere else. I asked you to hold the ladder underneath. I climbed up to the courtyard wall and looked out. As a result, my father happened to be passing by in the alley. He saw it and gave me a scolding. When you heard the noise, he turned around and ran away, leaving me on the ladder without daring to go down. He watched helplessly as my mother ran over and caught me." Thinking of the mischievous times when she was young, Mrs. Lu pursed her lips and smiled, holding onto the ladder and climbing up. "The ladder is not big, so the little girl can climb it and play. Mrs. Lu is already an adult and has a lot of capital. In addition, she has a gentle temperament and does not exercise often. It is still difficult to climb the ladder, and her legs are shaky." Seeing this, Su Buling stepped forward and raised his hand to hold the ladder. "Don't worry, Aunt Lu. I'll catch it if it falls." "How could it fall? I've climbed it many times." Mrs. Lu has been staying in the boudoir all year round. Apparently she hasn't done this kind of climbing up and down for a long time. She slowly climbed to the top of the ladder, held her hand on the wall, and looked outside the high wall. Her eyes swept across the endless deep courtyard. "And the lights of Qinhua in the distance, I don't know what I'm thinking about." Su Buling held onto the ladder and looked up at Mrs. Lu above. Due to the height difference between them, the only things he could see were the embroidered shoes and the bottom of her skirt. Wearing thin pants, you can't actually see much, but the angle is obviously a bit inappropriate. Cough dash. Su Buring coughed lightly and looked away, with a slightly strange expression. Mrs. Lu was startled by the coughing sound, and she looked away and looked down. Then she remembered that she was no longer a girl of several years old, and that the person below was not Yunu but Su Buling. She was slightly panicked, and she was busy trying to tighten her skirt to prevent it from being exposed. However, her hands left the courtyard wall and she couldn't stand firmly. She fell off the ladder with a ah-dash sound. Su Buling was a little amused, and he opened his arms to catch Mrs. Lu, who was in a hurry. As expected, it fell. Mrs. Lu's face turned a little pale. After she recovered, she turned slightly red. She broke away from Su Buling's arm and patted her skirt. "I haven't stood firm yet." As she said that, she looked at the swing next to her. She looked like she wanted to go. "Reminiscing about my childhood, but worrying about breaking it." Su Buling walked to the swing frame, raised his hand to hold the hemp rope and tried it. It was very strong, so he smiled and said, "Aunt Lu, come here." Mrs. Lu glanced left and right to see that no niece or maid was peeking, then she slowly walked to the swing and sat down. She held the rope of the swing with both hands and swung it tentatively a few times. Creak. The swing that has not been moved for a long time makes a slight sound, and the skirt and embroidered shoes are swaying in the air. The shadow of the life here can still be vaguely seen. Su Buling pushed Aunt Lu gently and recalled, "There is also a swing in the Sea of Flowers in Suzhou, placed in a small wooden house, but I don't seem to have played with it when I was a child. When your mother came to Jinling, she liked this swing very much. She said at that time that she would get one when she returned home. I remember that my family didn't let me go out and run around at night, so I begged your mother to help her get out of the hospital. He turned over on the other side of the wall and carried me out. I was very envious at the time and wanted to learn how to fly over the wall. Unfortunately, I failed in the end. Ever since your mother went to Suzhou, she didn't know how she got here. It's been so long. Already." Mrs. Lu said this and sighed softly. After staying in Chang'an and marrying into the Xiao family, although she did not live a hard life, like Xiang her future path was clear and she had nothing else to do except live out the rest of her life. She missed the courtyard she lived in when she was a child, and also missed the big sister who took her around, but it was already gone, and there was no use missing it. Just when her life was gradually losing its color and becoming like a pool of stagnant water, Su Buletinling's arrival changed everything. This is why Mrs. Lu clings to Su Buring almost every step of the way, because apart from taking good care of Su Buring, she has nothing else to do in her life. All her feelings are pinned on Su Buring, including her own thoughts, and all my wishes have long since been spent in widowhood. At this time, sitting on the swing again, recalling the innocent and high ambitions of herself when she was young, Mrs. Lu was shocked to realize how much she had changed, and she was almost a completely different person. Seeing that Mrs. Lu was silent, Su Buling looked down at the hem of her skirt and embroidered shoes. She seemed to be in a bad mood and said softly, "Aunt Lu is only in her 20s and is still a young girl. It's too early to be sad." Mrs. Lu sighed quietly, raised her eyes to look at the embroidered building in front of her, and said softly, "Your Majesty, what should I do in the future? The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gongzi. Chapter 432. From the moment Su Buling arrived in Chang'an, Mrs. Lu's whole focus was to take good care of Su Buling. When Su Buling was not in good health when she returned to Suzhou, she followed him as expected. According to her thoughts when she left, Mrs. Lu should wait until Su Burang's health recovered before returning to Chang'an, but unknowingly, she actually made such a big circle and ran back to Jiangnan. If nothing else happened, Xiao Qi would have to be taken care of. Take it back to Suzhou. After all, Mrs. Lu is the daughter of the Lu family and the daughter-in-law of the Xiao family, and has nothing to do with the Su family. She wanted to wait for Su Buling to get married before returning to her husband's house, but she knew that she wouldn't be able to leave then. Su Buling wouldn't let her go. She didn't want to live that kind of lonely and widowed life anymore, let alone Xiang. It's gone, I don't even have a best friend to talk to, and I won't be able to survive long after I go back. What to do next? Su Buling heard this and thought for a moment, concubine. Mrs. Lu frowned, turned around and glared, don't talk nonsense. Then the princess. Mrs. Lu blinked her eyes and looked a little embarrassed, what should I do with Xiaoqi? Su Buletinling's eyes were a little innocent and he didn't dare to answer. Mrs. Lu noticed something was wrong with her, coughed slightly, and turned around, well, I was just kidding. I don't want to be a concubine. I've already been married. It's against etiquette, by the way, how about I be your son's nanny so that you have something to do when you stay in Suzhou? If you are busy with official duties in the future, someone will have to take care of the child. Those girls in Manzi can't take care of themselves, so I still have to do it. Su Buling helped Mrs. Lu's swaying shoulders, looked down her shoulders, looked at the skirt of her clothes, which was even more spectacular than Manzi, and said softly. Of course you can be a wet nurse, but a wet nurse must have given birth before she can breastfeed, Aunt Lu, I'm afraid you can't do it. Mrs. Lu just remembered this and glanced down, her eyes slightly disappointed. That's right, this is troublesome, Bai Chang is so big, cough dash. Su Buling blinked and thought about it carefully before confirming that he heard correctly. Mrs. Lu's expression was a little strange, and she couldn't find a topic. She sat on the swing and swayed, looking thoughtful, to ease the awkward atmosphere. Su Buling held Mrs. Lu's shoulders. The faint fragrance in front of her was overwhelming. After hesitating for a moment, she leaned into Mrs. Lu's ear and whispered. I heard from Xiang that she had inquired with Zhongli Jiju, and it seemed that a more massage would be enough. Breath blowing in her ears, Mrs. Lu shrank her neck slightly, glanced left and right, and after a long while, she said hesitantly. Really, really. Don't fool me, there is no such thing, but Miss Zhongli has superb medical skills and has some weird methods, so it is possible. Real. Su Buletinling nodded solemnly, slid his hands to his waist, and hugged Mrs. Lu, how about I teach Aunt Lu? Mrs. Lu's breathing became heavier. She sat on the swing and bit her lower lip, forget it, I'll go back and ask Xiang. Anyway, there are no outsiders, so nothing is nothing but nothing. Su Buletinling smiled kindly, took Mrs. Lu's hand, pulled it up with a little force, and pressed it on the lapel of her clothes. Woo dash. Mrs. Lu couldn't sit firmly on the swing and couldn't support her with her hands. She was forced to lean into Su Buling's arms. Her face turned red and she lowered her head and stammered. Ling forget it, I'll just talk, woo dash. I didn't mean anything, I just taught Aunt Lu. Call me Hongluan. The moon and stars are sparse, and the house is silent. In the quiet courtyard, the swing swayed slightly next to the Osmanthus tree. A beautiful woman in a dark green dress, with spring-like brows and mist-filled eyes. It took a lot of courage and strength to say these 5 words. Call me Hongluan. What it means is self-evident. Su Buletinling paused in his movements, with a bit of surprise in his eyes. He turned his head and looked at her red face. After thinking for a while, he called out in a very gentle voice. Red Luan. Lu Hongluan clenched her hands tightly, and she could clearly feel her body shaking. She kept looking around, and after holding on for a long time, she quietly leaned a little closer to Su Buling's arms. Su Buling smiled, hugged her a little tighter, and said seriously, it feels weird to call me Hongluan. You are my aunt. Lu Hongluan's expression stiffened, and then his eyes showed a bit of annoyance, and he hit Su Buling's waist with his elbow. Are you sick? He stood up and left the embrace. Su Buling did not let go of his hand and comforted him softly. Just kidding, don't be angry, I will continue to teach you. Let me go, I don't want to learn anymore. Do you think I can't see that you have some crooked ideas? Xiang'er has suffered many losses and told me everything. I didn't tell you. Really? What did Xiang'er say about me in private? I'll go back and deal with her. She said that you are fierce, to make me angry on purpose. You can't spoil her all the time. How long has she been with you? How long have I taken care of you? I made all the clothes and shoes you wear. She doesn't know how to do it at all. Nuhong, last time I embroidered a white handkerchief, it was a mess. Lu Hongluan was obviously as heartbroken as a deer, and her words were somewhat incoherent. She slowly took out the white handkerchief Xiang'er gave her from her arms and showed it to Su Buling. Haha, okay, I'll go back and take care of her until you're satisfied. Don't say it was me who instigated it. Xiang'er holds a grudge. He must have tried every means to torment me, ugh. As he was talking, his mouth was blocked by Su Buling. This was probably the first time Lu Hongluan had been so bold after getting married. She sat in her former small world, relying on the man who had already entrusted her body and mind to her. She did not avoid him anymore, and even responded a little awkwardly. Su Buletinling had a smile in his eyes and his movements were very gentle. However, in just a short moment, Lu Hongluan lost all his strength, his eyes were hazy and misty, and he slowly closed his eyes as he looked at the handsome face that was so close that he could not see clearly. The swing was not swaying, only the cool wind was blowing the old Osmanthus tree, and the world was quiet as if there were only two people. I don't know how long it took, but the handsome young man in white bent down as before, picked up the charming woman with a stunning figure, and walked slowly to the boudoir next to her. It's a pity that Lu Hongluan has a conservative temperament. No matter how courageous he is, he doesn't dare to mess around with men in his parents' house. He unconsciously realized that he touched the quilt and pillow. He opened his eyes, his face turned red and his breathing became rapid. He pushed gently. Okay, don't go too far, our family knows we are here, so we can't go out tomorrow morning. Su Buletinling sighed secretly and did not force herself. He leaned against him and hugged her, smiling and saying, then lie down for a while. Lu Hongluan responded in a low voice and put her forehead against Su Buling's chest, nervously but cherishing the moment of tenderness that she had never dared to hope for before. The only thing that affects the atmosphere may be that Su Buling has to be patted on his thief hand from time to time. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 433. Compared to the music of Jinling City, the Hongshan Lake area 200 miles away is a completely different scene. The cold wind blows the flags of the water fort by the lake. Several sentries holding weapons, wrapped tightly in animal skin coats, hold torches and patrol from a high place. The lights in the water fort are bright, and temporary houses are piled up in a mess. Groups of water bandits sit by the fire and eat meat and wine. In the wooden cages above the water, several young men in fancy clothes are locked up, their faces pale and dare not say a word. There are wooden stakes on the main road to the water fort, on which are hung the skins of several officers and soldiers, which have been dried for a long time. The water fort is called Hongshan Water Fort by the local people. It is not a new one, but has existed for many years. It was originally a deserted fishing village. 10 years ago, Songji Taiying's hunting of deer forced countless people with dirty backgrounds to rebel and hide in the fishing village. It was similar to the shabby mountain stronghold that the swordsman Zhang Ding encountered. Similar fugitive gathering places were almost everywhere in Daewoo. In order to avoid being tracked down by the government, most of them did not show up to cause trouble. Hongshan Water Stronghold was relatively peaceful in the past few years. The owner Sun Qian himself was a martial arts expert and had some reputation in the world. He gathered a group of bandits and relied on the natural dangers of Hongshan Lake to do some kidnapping and robbery business. He would not kill the hostages for money, so he did not cause panic. The reason why it evolved into such a large bandit stronghold with thousands of water bandits gathered was quite complicated. 60 years ago, after Emperor Xiaozong broke Chang'an, the royal family of Daqi fled to Mobei, and Nanyu was lingering in the mountains. It was only one step away from pacifying the world. General Su Lai and Emperor Xiaozong naturally wanted to sweep across the 8 wildernesses and 6 directions in one go. But fighting was too damaging to the country's strength. After nearly 10 years of chaos in the 3 kingdoms, the population dropped sharply and the land was barren. Almost all the men who were forced to fight died. Many generals and officials were successful and famous, and the soldiers were tired of fighting and could not fight anymore. Seeing this, Emperor Xiaozong could only withdraw his troops to recuperate and enfeoff his 6 sons to various places as princes to start post-war reconstruction. Because the threat from the enemy was still there, he asked Su Lai to lead his troops out of Jianyang Pass to recover the western regions and clamp down on the left wing of northern Qi. During this withdrawal of troops, Emperor Xiaozong was busy restoring people's livelihood until his death, and General Su Lai was unable to fulfill his wish to lead the northern expedition. Northern Qi breathed a sigh of relief and gained a firm foothold in the desert of Mobei. After the previous emperor ascended the throne, he was busy rectifying the internal affairs all his life. It took 2 generations to restore Daewoo to its former prosperity. By the time they were able to fight the northern expedition, Su Lai had already passed away. Daewoo occupied the entire central plains, and Mobei was a barbarian land, so it was meaningless to fight it. Most of the generals and aristocratic families did not want to fight, and the late emperor naturally did not provoke a war. But Daewoo and northern Qi never stopped fighting from the beginning to the end, and northern Qi could not stay in the wilderness of Mobei forever. Sooner or later, it would march south to take back what its ancestors had thrown away. The late emperor appointed the crown prince on his deathbed because he saw this. Songyu and Songji were both cultivated by the late emperor as heirs. Songji had both literary and military strategies, but he was too ambitious. As long as he succeeded to the throne, he would probably drag the whole world into the quagmire of war. Songyu was inferior to Songji in all aspects, but his moderation was also an advantage. As long as Songyu inherited the throne, he would not take the initiative to take risks, such as mobilizing troops and reducing vassal states, and he would honestly be a king who maintained the status quo, which was enough to delay the peaceful and prosperous era for a few more decades. The late emperor had guarded the family business for his whole life, and he certainly wanted to continue to guard it, but after 2 generations of hard work, the northern Qi dynasty was no longer the dog that lost its home. The lineage of the king of Su in the northwest had developed into a tumor, and even had the ability to enter Chang'an city in 10 days. Let Songyu take the throne. If Su Buling grew up to be a hero, and let him develop for another generation, Guanzhong Road might have changed its surname to Su. For this reason, the late emperor gave the throne to Songji when he was dying. What Songji took over was a peaceful and prosperous era on the surface, but in fact it was a volcano that had accumulated pressure for decades and was about to erupt. After Songji came to power, he began to find ways to suppress the military families that had expanded to a certain extent, promoted the imperial examination and reused the poor to reduce the influence of the family, established a huge intelligence network of the investigation department to bypass the existing bureaucratic system to get information, etc., in order to make his subordinates obedient when the northern Qi dynasty started the army. However, after the failure of the attempt to reduce the power of Su Buling, the situation had already begun to develop out of control, and the hidden dangers left over from decades were not limited to this. Because the power of northern Qi was rising steadily, Emperor Daio could not reduce the army. Heavy troops were deployed all year round on the long fronts in the north and south. The military pay plus war horses, weapons, food, and grass, etc., consumed astronomical figures, which led to a lot of heavy taxes on the people. Most of them were concentrated in the richest Jiangnan and the land of abundance, Shu. These two had no foreign enemies and did not need to maintain heavy troops. Last year, there was a severe drought in Shu and the king of Shu asked for help. Songji asked the nearby king of Su to raise food from Qinzhou instead of transporting it from Guanzhong Road. This was because without Shu, other places were running at full capacity and it was difficult to squeeze out oil and water. And this autumn, it rained for more than 10 days in a row, and Muzhu and other places in Jiangnan suffered from floods. The people had no harvest and could not pay the annual tax at all. Faced with the huge hole, the king of Wu did not even send a memorial to Chang'an requesting tax reduction and exemption, because Songji would not agree, and he had to find ways to raise money. When there is a famine, instead of providing relief, heavy taxes are imposed. The effect is predictable. The people who have already suffered from the famine had to flee to other places far away from home to avoid heavy taxes, resulting in a large number of refugees. Many of them took risks to burn, kill, and rob, which scared more people to flee everywhere. This is also the source of refugees in Huainan and other places. The Hongshan Water Village has gradually grown in size by hosting exiled bandits over the years. Especially this year, the number of people has increased several times. In order to feed so many people, there were more and more kidnappings and robberies, which made the area around Hongshan Lake so smoky that no one dared to stay. After officers and soldiers came to stir things up a few times but to no avail, it became what it is now. Under the silver moon, in the mountains and fields opposite Hongshan Water Village, Zhongli Chuchu, who came from Huainan, stood on a high place and looked at the huge water village in the distance. His green eyes showed some embarrassment and said softly, "It's hard to deal with such a big village." Zhongli Jiju built a bonfire on the stone, put the newly caught fish on the branches to bake, and said with a smile, "This is a matter for Daio's government. It has nothing to do with us. What do we care about what they do?" Zhongli Chuchu jumped down from the height, sat on the ground beside his master, and said softly, "I have nothing to do, I want to do something good. After doing this, I should be a famous chivalrous woman in the world, better than Neng Qingyi after all. Master is also famous all over the world, and Neng Yu he will probably be embarrassed to be with you. Presumptuous in front of me. I have to say that this reason is very sufficient." Zhongliju frowned and thought for a moment, then turned his head and looked at the water village in the distance. "Okay, it's just a small water village, just wrap it up on me." Zhongli Chuchu felt a little hesitant when he saw his master agreeing so simply. "Master, there are estimated to be 1,000 bandits. Do you really agree?" Zhongli Jiju's eyes showed a bit of pride, and he patted his bulging chest. "Aren't you still worried about taking action for your master?" "Well." Zhongli Chuchu was really worried, and thought for a moment, "How about we stop discussing it? Don't end up involving both of us. Don't worry, I am a wise teacher and have my own sense of proportion. Besides, Hongshan Water Village seems to have some discernment and never touches people from those big families. If I really miss it, I will say that I am Su Buling's master, and you are Su Buling's mistress." Ah! There was something strange in Zhongli's green eyes, and he waved his hand and said, "How can this be done? Aren't you happy? It's okay to be a mistress who is a teacher but not allowed to do so. No, Su Buling is the prince of Suzhou, and he has no control over this place. It's useless to tell him, and if Su Buling knows, he won't necessarily pay attention to us." Zhongli Chuchu said this, his face looked a little lonely, and he sighed softly. Zhongli Jiju frowned, And after realizing this problem, he was also a little dissatisfied. I was so good to him that I even gave him the chain dragon goo. Once I locked the dragon goo, there was no antidote. He should come over. If he really came here for this, he would probably use Master to detoxify him first, so that he would not be able to find you if he was poisoned later. Faced with the poison of the same dragon-locking goo, one becomes immune after detoxification. This obviously makes sense. Zhongli Jiju became a little more serious and thought about it for a moment. That's right, then do you want to take action? Master, it's up to you, I'm free to do whatever I want. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 434. Early the next morning, Su Buling left the Lu family and went to the Qinhua River to look for Xiaoqi. Lu Hongluan finally returned to her parents' home, so she naturally had to stay at home for a few more days. Moreover, Lu Hongluan had a relaxed personality. He always liked to think about random things in the dead of night. When he met outsiders during the day, he felt embarrassed and ashamed for what happened at night. When it comes to meeting people, I guess I have to stay in hiding for a few days. Thinking of what happened last night, Su Buling felt quite satisfied. Aunt Lu obviously showed her true feelings last night. She let go of all the shackles she had and spent half an hour with him as a woman. Because he had been warned in advance, Su Buling knew that she had a conservative temperament and was afraid that she would be embarrassed and unable to think about it afterwards. It didn't really mean anything, but she did a lot of things. When he was in Chang'an, Su Buling knew that Aunt Lu would often call his name when he was half asleep and half awake, then rub him back and forth, and even change the sheets during the day. In order to comfort the woman who had been widowed for too long, Su Buling was naturally meticulous, kissed her from top to bottom, and forced her to change the sheets again. Su Buling originally thought that Aunt Lu was a very conservative woman who always looked dignified, but she didn't expect that she would be even more clingy than Xiang'er when she got into the mood. Xiang'er has a cheerful personality and is open-minded in front of others. In fact, he is very shy in private. He will resist anything he says. He always has the look of "I don't like it, but I will reluctantly agree if you like it." He will never take the initiative. Needless to say, Master Bai was crying and wishing it would end immediately, as if he was being tortured. Aunt Lu, on the other hand, seemed to be very conservative. She would be shy and annoyed for a long time when she was touched. She really let go of that clingy person, and she couldn't even push him away. If a maid hadn't shouted outside that it was time to eat, she would have been able to turning around and eating him up. It perfectly explained what it means to be as strong as a wolf at 30. Although Aunt Lu is not 30 years old, she definitely has the energy. While thinking about it, Su Buling came to the vicinity of Wenda Bridge and saw Nightingale waiting by the roadside, so he put away his messy thoughts. Nightingale was waiting at the intersection, listening boredly to the storyteller on the roadside telling a story about the king of the northwest came to Jinling City, and Nanshan Port defeated 3 bandits with 2 swords. I have to say that the efficiency of this work is astonishing. The incident of killing people on the street in Nanshan Port last night was determined in the morning that 2 rat droppings came out of the Nanshan Port guards. Su Buling was able to find out and rectify the law on the spot. The Yang family withdraw the escort team and go back to conduct self-examination to avoid a similar situation happening again. This not only gave Su Buling face, but also took care of the Yang family's face, and also gave him a reasonable excuse to the outside world. Su Buling knew that as soon as he left, the Yang family would come back and continue to occupy Nanshan Port. He didn't say much about it. He walked up and patted Nightingale on the lower back. "Let's go." Nightingale was alone last night and went out for a walk. The skirt on her body was changed to a popular style in Jinling, but her big black braids still hung down on the back of her head, looking very smart. After Nightingale looked at the storyteller for a few times, she walked beside Su Buling and said softly, "I checked yesterday, and followed the man with a broken arm to the Yang family in Zhongshan to have a look. Yang Yingxiang relied on his sister to rise to the sky. He is a very respectable person. In order to get into the eyes of major aristocratic families, he spent a lot of money. He held poetry and cultural gatherings at large sums of money, and also built bridges and roads to accumulate fame. His reputation in Jinling was pretty good. However, the Yang family was secretly very unclean. Several prostitute boats on the Qinhua River were owned by his family, and they had been involved in forcing girls into prostitution. He also plays games in gambling houses and extorts family property, etc. He often causes murders under his control. When he is found out, he will just find someone and send him to the government to deal with the matter, and then spend money to get the person out. He is not a good person anyway. Do you want it? I went to click him. Su Buling raised his hand and flicked Nightingale's little head. You have never killed anyone. Nightingale straightened out her little chest, and her eyes showed a sense of duty. I'm good at killing bad guys. There is always a first time for everyone. Things will become smoother after seeing blood. When Su Buling heard this, he felt that his thoughts were a little distorted. He turned his head and looked at little Nightingale. You will definitely see blood the first time, but killing is avoided. Don't have any thoughts of killing in the future. Killing is just a means, not an end. Putting the cart before the horse will lead to consequences. It's unimaginable. Nightingale blinked her big eyes, not quite understanding. Su Buling shook his head and smiled, pretending to be an elder. Everyone has parents, wives, and children. Thinking of this will make you soft-hearted. People also have violent impulses. If they don't restrain themselves, they will attack too hard. Neither is desirable. You must regard yourself as the executioner is not involved in personal emotions, he is just doing what he should do, but if he is too indifferent to human life, he will not be a human being, so he can leave it alone. Nightingale thought carefully for a moment, shook her head and said, I don't understand what the young master said before. You said you will definitely see blood the first time. It doesn't seem to be referring to murder. The elder Su Buling's expression froze. Don't think too much. Nightingale has a smart mind. After reading books in Ulilo and watching Su Buling's erotic drama every day, she has already understood things that she shouldn't have understood. Walking forward, he whispered. I'm just a maid, and I'll see blood sooner or later, so I'm not afraid. When Su Buling heard this, he rubbed Nightingale's head helplessly. How can you call me a girl if you are not afraid? You are not a dead soldier. You have to have your own emotions. When I tease you, you have to be shy like a little maid and have no reaction at all. Then you can't be a talking encyclopedia. Nightingale said oh, thoughtfully, and after taking a few steps, she suddenly said shyly. Young master is disgusting. Su Buling stumbled, got goosebumps all over his body, and glared at the little Nightingale with some annoyance. The purpose of coming to Jinling was to accompany Xiaoting to participate in the Jinling Poetry Festival, also known as the Jiangnan Poetry Festival. Like the Flower Festival for selecting courtesans, it is considered a relatively large event in Jiangnan. It is held once a year, and students from several academies and talented people from all over the country will come here to show their talents. Among them are many famous scholars, and it is not a problem to directly recommend them to become officials. The small-scale poetry festival in Chang'an cannot be compared with the flourishing literary style in Jiangnan. At this time, the Qinhua River is full of painted boats, and talented men and beautiful women have never appeared together. Famous courtesans from all over the country have basically come, and the inns and restaurants along the coast are also crowded. The Jinling Poetry Society is even more crowded, and they have begun to warm up for the opening ceremony in the evening. Su Buling walked with Nightingale through the crowd of scholars and ladies. Born in the northwest, he was taller than most men in the south of the Yangtze River. He stood out from the crowd and his appearance was too eye-catching. It was impossible for him to keep a low profile. He was found before he even reached the bookstore opened by the Xiao family. "Prince Su, we met again after a few days of absence." A clear voice came from the street. Su Buling looked to the side and saw Wang Ruiyang, the legitimate son of the Wang family in Hangzhou, standing at the window. He was dressed as an ordinary scholar and stood at the door of a jade shop. He smiled and raised his hand to salute. "Thank you for the reward of 10,000 yuan from Tingmiankuk. Thank you for the reward of 10,000 yuan from Huashan Piaoxiahua. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 435. Prince Wang, nice to meet you. Beside the Qinhua River, in front of the beautifully decorated jade pavilion, Su Buling came to the gate with Nightingale and nodded to greet him. Wang Ruiyang had a humble expression, raised his hand to perform a scholar's salute, and chuckled. "I have an appointment with Brother Xiao to attend the Jinling Poetry Festival, and I'm here to pick gifts for the birthday banquet of King Wu. I didn't expect Brother Xiao to come here, but Prince Su came first." Since they met, they naturally had to say a few polite words. Su Buling smiled and walked into the jade pavilion, taking a glance. Brother Wang was also invited to celebrate the birthday of King Wu. "I'm afraid there's nothing good to be found in this place. The jade shop can be opened near the most prosperous Jinling Poetry Society, so its grade must be high. The items displayed inside are all valuable, and it is obviously prepared for the wealthy families in Jinling City. But when one's status reaches the level of a king or a prince, he will definitely look down on the items that can be sold on the street. Without some illusions and origins, he can't show them off at all. After all, the Wang family in Hangzhou is a big family that has been passed down for hundreds of years. Even if they don't have a collection habit like the Xiao family, they always have some background. How can they go to the street to buy birthday gifts for the king of Wu? Wang Ruiyang was waiting here, so naturally he would not find such a far-fetched reason. He explained with a smile. "Su Shizi is wrong. The king of Wu likes to collect jade. My family lives in Hangzhou, right under the eyes of the king of Wu. The king of Wu has already seen the items in my house, and he doesn't like any of them. This shop often finds rare items from the market, including heirlooms from poor families, so I came to take a look. Last time I heard Su Shizi talking about the ice flower hibiscus pendant, I wanted to discuss with him to buy it and give it to King Wu. King Wu seemed to like it very much, but when I thought that Su Shizi was going to celebrate King Wu's birthday, I gave up." This sentence is very skillful, pointing out that King Wu is very interested in rare jades, and then thought that Su Buling wanted to give his jade to King Wu, so he didn't ask Su Buling to buy it. Since Su Buling heard it, if he didn't take it out at the birthday banquet, he must be worried that Wang Ruiyang had told King Wu about it in advance, and King Wu was thinking about it for a long time but didn't give it to him. How embarrassing is it? Last time we talked about the 3 jades in our hands, and told Wang Ruiyang on the spot that he couldn't give it to him, it would definitely reach King Wu's ears. Dualai. Jadeware is just a beautiful stone for the prince of a vassal state. Even if he can find the treasure book of the heaven, it will be more of an excuse to give it to King Wu to celebrate his birthday. Can he still feel sorry for such a small thing? I don't know how long Wang Ruiyang spent discussing this sentence with his advisors last night. It seems to be a casual statement, but it blocks all the ways to refuse. When Su Buling sits in front of King Wu at the banquet, even if he pretends not to know, King Wu will say, "I heard Wang Ruiyang mention it a few days ago." How to answer? "I don't want to give up the jade pendant and don't want to give it to King Wu, so I didn't take it out." Su Buling didn't expect Wang Ruiyang to come up with such a clever excuse, but the hairpin is Fuebao's token of love. If he gives it to King Wu, Fuebao will be so angry that he will cry. It must not be given. Su Buling picked up the exquisite jade bracelet on the stage and looked at it for a few times, and put it on Nightingale's wrist. King Wu has this hobby? This is the first time I've heard of it. It's a pity that the jade was promised to the girl he loved. If the king of Wu really liked it, it would be fine to let him see it. This is obviously a bit inappropriate. Could it be that women are more important than the friendship between the princes? If the king of Wu heard this, he would definitely feel uncomfortable. Seeing that Su Buling dared to say this, Wang Ruiyang turned his eyes slightly, but did not say much, just chuckled and said, "The prince is really romantic and suave. The king of Wu loves jade. If he really likes it, I am afraid he will think about it for a long time." This sentence points out how much the king of Wu loves beautiful jade. Wang Rui can only say this much. Whether to give it to Su Buling or not depends on Su Buling. Su Buling chuckled and did not say anything else. After letting Nightingale pay for the bracelet, he said a few polite words and left the Jade Pavilion. Wang Ruiyang sent the two out of the Jade Pavilion, watched Su Buling go away, and then asked the staff next to him. From Su Buling's tone, he didn't want to give it to the King of Wu, so he could only let the King of Wu observe it. His tone was very tough, and he was not afraid that the King of Wu would be dissatisfied. "What should I do?" The staff also frowned, a little worried. If Su Buling really didn't want to give it, King Wu couldn't just rob it, and the Wang family couldn't go and rob the prince of a vassal king. After a little thought, he responded, "Now that it's come to this, send a letter to King Wu to explain the situation. If you want to get the jade at all costs, you have to let King Wu send someone else to do it." Wang Ruiyang nodded gently, knowing that this matter was beyond his ability, and he stopped struggling. He turned around and walked to the second floor and began to write a letter. Two bodies kissed each other and hugged each other, two guns stood side by side and stabbed the door, Mandarin ducks played with Mandarin ducks in the quilt, and played with the backyard in the backyard. Good poem, good poem. Mr. Xiao is really talented. In the elegant hall on the second floor of the Xiao Family Book Club, more than a dozen famous talents in Jinling gathered together, full of admiration. Xiao Ting, wearing the same scholar's robe as Su Buling, wrote down the masterpiece he had worked hard on by the window. Su Buling walked slowly through the corridor and heard this meaningful poem. He nodded slightly and felt that Xiao Ting had made some progress recently and could write poems by himself. Nightingale touched the jade bracelet on her wrist and heard the voice inside, muttering softly, "Mister, these are two couplets put together, and they are not neat. That's fine. What does two guns stood side by side and stabbed the door mean?" Su Buling's lips curled slightly and he explained casually, "Bayonet fighting, you won't understand even if I tell you." The little Nightingale was a little unhappy. She hesitated for a moment and snorted, "It's just Long Yangzi, I read it in the book." Su Buling had nothing to say. He raised his hand and flicked her forehead. The book club is the property of the Xiao family. It is located next to the Jinling Poetry Club. Strictly speaking, it is a non-profit industry. It is more like a library. There are many rare and precious books for students in Jinling to borrow. This is also a way for the aristocratic families to accumulate reputation. The book club is very large. There are several rooms on the third floor for the Xiao family members who come to Jinling to do business. Xiao Qi's office is on the inside, facing the Qinhua River. Su Buling came to the study on the third floor of the book club. He looked up and saw that Xiao Qi was rarely sitting behind the desk to handle affairs. Instead, he clenched his fists and stood at the window looking at the second floor below, motionless. She was still wearing a black long skirt, but the weather was getting colder. She had a shawl on her shoulders, long hair down to her waist, and a gourd-like figure, just like Xiang exuding the charm of a woman. After spending some time with Xiao Qi, Su Buling could already accurately tell who was the elder sister. Although he could only see her from behind, he could still feel the chilling aura from Xiao Qi. If his calculations were correct, young Master Xiao would not be able to go out for a month after returning home. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 436. There are many tourists on the banks of the Qinhua River. The singers clear their throats and sing Yufang tunes gracefully. The talented men raise their glasses and stand on the bow of the boat to beat the fu and sing. As far as the eye can see, they are all the romantic scholars in the prosperous age. Xiao Qi tightened her black shawl and stood in front of the window of the three-story building facing the street. The slightly cold wind blew the black hair on her temples, and her eyes were rarely in a trance. When I arrived in Jinling yesterday, I met a local snake from the Yang family at Nanshan port. She had always disliked the small power of the Yang family in Jinling, which relied on people's influence to make a fortune, but because of the favor of the king of Wu, she had never paid any attention to them. This time she brought Su Buling over. She felt that Su Buling's identity was suitable, so she asked Su Buling to knock on the Yang family. As a result, Su Buling killed people without saying a word, which shocked her. Afterwards, I figured out the whole story and felt that this solution was the simplest. The Yang family also honestly accepted the advice and didn't even say a word of complaint. But for some reason, Xiao Qi always felt a little uncomfortable. It's not that she thinks killing is wrong. As the head of the Xiao family, she can make decisions that can affect disputes between the two countries and involve millions of lives and deaths. She doesn't feel disturbed at all by the scene of killing. The reason why I felt uneasy was because it was Su Buling who killed him. Last time on the dragon climbing platform, she had seen the scene where Su Buling killed people. The severed limbs were more bloody than yesterday, but it was a fight between trapped animals and they had to fight hard. At other times, Su Buling looked polite and graceful in her eyes. Especially that time in the palace, Su Buling's gentle eyes and words that could make one's bones tingle are still fresh in her memory. Although Xiao Qi didn't want to admit it, she did prefer the gentler Su Buling in her heart. Now that she was ready to marry to Suzhou, she naturally didn't want her future husband to be a murderous, cold-blooded animal. It's very tiring to get along like that. While I was thinking about it, I heard Mr. Xiao's fighting the bayonet from downstairs. Xiao Qi came back to her senses, and there was a bit of chill in her eyes. The little emotions that were difficult to express seemed to have found an outlet, and they were all concentrated on the slutty nephew downstairs. Even if Su Buling is cold-blooded, he is stronger than Xiao Ting. If nothing else, at least he has enough momentum as a person in power. Moreover, the poems are really good, and they are also harmful to the country and the people. The second brother and the second sister-in-law are also very talented, not to mention intelligent, so why did they give birth to such a fool as Xiao Ting? Also do it in the backyard. When Xiao Qi thought of this, her eyes became colder. She had read a lot of books since she was a child and had read all kinds of things, so she naturally understood the meaning. In the circle of literati, raising a baby is an elegant and interesting thing. Xiao Ting, a fool like him, would not be too arty to touch this. Will Su Buletin Ling. Dong dong. Miss Xiao. While I was thinking wildly, there was a knock on the door behind me. Xiao Qi's eyes narrowed slightly, she put away her inexplicable wandering thoughts, and returned to her usual calm expression. She turned around and gave a blessing, Prince Su. Then she walked to the desk and sat down, and said softly, "Go and call Xiao Ting up. I have something to say to him." The words were soft and not in a commanding tone. Su Buling was asked to call for help because if Xiao Qi let the maid go, those scholars would know that she was angry and would laugh at Xiao Ting in their hearts. Although she is the head of the Xiao family, she is still a woman. According to etiquette and law, the family status of a legitimate daughter is not as high as that of a legitimate son, and Xiao Ting cannot lose face in front of outsiders. Su Buling naturally understood why Xiao Qi was called Xiao Ting. He walked into the study room with a smile and sat down opposite Xiao Qi. It's just a joke between men, there's no need to interfere. Xiao Qi knew not to interfere with men's personal relationships, but what Xiao Ting was talking about was really hard to hear. Seeing that Su Buletinling looked unconcerned, he frowned and retorted. Be polite and courteous in front of others. If this is just a joke, why haven't I seen you make such a joke before? Su Buring smiled softly and opened his mouth. The gentle path, the winding corridor, the delicate flowers and weak willows, the heavy rain, the short spring night and the long love. Xiao Qi's eyes widened and she looked at Su Buling in disbelief. She didn't expect that he could really write such an unflattering thing. How does it sound like describing the night she was defiled? Teasing me in front of me? When Xiao Qi came back to her senses, her already slightly cold cheeks became a little more angry. She picked up the yellow pearwood paperweight on the desk and threw it at Su Buling. "Se embryo, get out of here." Su Buling knew he would be beaten, so he caught the yellow pear paperweight lightly and placed it on the table. All men are like this. Those who talk about benevolence and morality and talk about women are called hypocrites. Even the current holy emperor drank wine with my father. There is really no need to take it to heart. Xiao Qi stared at Su Buling like a she-cat, her eyes full of threats, but her mouth was slightly open, revealing two small tiger teeth that were exactly the same as Xiang Er's. Not only did she not look fierce, but she was also a little cute. Su Buling was stared at for a moment, and he couldn't bear it. He raised his hand and said, "That's it? I'll be more cautious. Let's get down to business." Xiao Qi took a few breaths to calm down her slightly turbulent emotions, leaned on the Taishi chair, crossed her legs and looked at Su Buring. "Say it." Su Buling thought for a moment and said softly, "I don't have an eyeliner in Jiangnan. Please help me find someone. His name is Zhongli Chuchu. He is one of the 8 contemporary leaders. You should have seen his portrait. He wears red clothes and often wears a veil while riding a white horse. The camel appeared in Huainan a few days ago, and I don't know where it went. Contemporary Bagui." Xiao Qi squinted her eyes slightly, looked at Su Buling carefully and said, "What are you doing with her?" Su Buling knew that the king of Wu was determined to get the jade in his hand. This time, he celebrated the king of Wu's birthday and followed the instructions of Fu Bao's grandfather to show the jade to the king of Wu so that the king of Wu could continue his plan. But now he only has 2 jades in his hands, and the ice flower lotus pendant was given to Chuchu. When Su Buling met Zhongli Chuchu, he wanted to play hard to get and let Chuchu hang out for a few days, waiting for her to run over and pay for him. As a result, I don't know why, Zhongli Chuchu suddenly changed her temper and ran away without a trace. Su Buling asked the accompanying palace guards to secretly look for her, but there was no whereabouts, so he could only ask for help from Miss Xiao, who was basically in Jiangnan. However, these things were told to the daughter-in-law who had not yet married, and even if Xiao Qi was open-minded, it was impossible for her not to have any opinions. Su Buling had no choice but to explain. "She is a friend I met in the martial arts world. She also provided the solution to the dragon locking goo. It may not be safe to go to Hangzhou this time. To prevent any loss, it is better to find her back." Xiao Qi nodded slightly, and did not ask any more questions. She nodded. "I know." After Su Buling finished talking about the business, he looked at Xiao Qi for a few times. "Miss Xiao doesn't seem to be busy. Do you want me to go out with you?" Faced with Su Buling's invitation, Xiao Qi hesitated. She has always been businesslike and has no experience in dating men. If she goes out, she will definitely follow Su Buling and say something, and maybe she will be led by Su Buling and take advantage of him. Xiao Qi doesn't like to stay in a place where she can't control the situation, but she doesn't want to refuse, so she said softly, "I'm tired and don't want to go out. The poetry meeting will start soon. Since you are in Jinling, you have to prepare 2 poems for emergency. Do you have any good works in mind? I'll give you some advice. It seems that she wants to talk about poetry with Su Buling, which is also a way to enhance feelings and deepen each other's impressions. Su Buling would naturally not refuse. His delicate peach blossom eyes showed a bit of smile, and he casually said, "Last night, I moored by the Qinhua River. I was inspired and wrote a little poem." Oh, Xiao Qi flipped through Xiang'er's hidden manuscripts that night when she was licked clean. Knowing that Su Buling had some poetic talent, she sat up straighter and listened carefully. "Go ahead." Su Buling thought for a moment and said seriously, hand in hand, holding each other's wrists, blowing out the lights with a shy smile, pricked the peach blossom core with a golden needle, and didn't dare to speak loudly and frowned secretly. "Get lost." Even though Xiao Qi was a calm person, she couldn't sit still anymore. Her face flushed, and she picked up the pen holder on the table and threw it over again. "Just finished writing 2 chapters, and I guess I'll have to wait until daytime to add more. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 437. Night falls quietly on the shores of the West Lake. A late snowfall falls on the head of the stone arch bridge. The boat in the lake is lit up with lights. The world seems to be quiet in the beautiful snow scene. Auspicious snow heralds a good harvest. The lights in the palace of Yahuang Mountain were as bright as day. Wu King Song Siming was dressed in a python robe. He sat on a chair and looked at the vast world in front of him, but there was no joy in his eyes. After a long silence, he sighed lightly. "It's hard to survive this winter." As the vassal king sitting in the south of the Yangtze River, Song Siming knew the current situation of the south of the Yangtze River better than anyone else. The major cities were full of wealthy families and the smell of wine and meat, and the roads in the wilderness were full of frozen bones. It is true that he is the richest in the world, but 90% of the money is in the hands of various powerful families, and the money cannot be used as food. The glutton in Chang'an who is not full of food will not understand how the prince of leisure of his has a way of leisure. The guards stood outside the attic, and there were only a few people on the observation deck. Han Xianchu, the staff member, stood behind King Wu, with a worried look on his face. After a little hesitation, he still advised. "Your Majesty, it's cold and freezing, so please take care of yourself and go in." Song Siming is the oldest among the 7 kings, almost reaching the age of 60. The root cause of the disease was caused by being in danger on the river, and his body has been very weak. However, the thin cheeks did not show any abnormality due to the severe cold. He turned to look at the middle-aged scholar next to him. "Hans Hung, the time and place are favorable and the people are harmonious. It seems that the only thing missing is harmony. If the weather gets colder, even if I don't do anything, I will be swept away by the general trend." Li Hans Hung, who was standing by the guard-rail, was as tall and handsome as he was when he stayed at Sun's shop, but there was a bit more vicissitudes and an imperceptible coldness between his brows. He was no longer the same person who had been waiting for a piece of silver. "I have been a stupid scholar for several days." Since the bandit stronghold in Shu was wiped out, Li Han gave birth to his wife and lost his daughter, becoming a lonely ghost wandering the rivers and lakes. Maybe it was in response to the old saying, "Heaven will give great responsibility to this person." After experiencing the saddest thing in the world, Li Hans Hung seemed to suddenly wake up and become a completely different person. In just 10 years, from a down-and-out scholar who couldn't bear to kill chickens, he became the head of the Eagle Tower. His name was at the top of the heroes of the Criminal Investigation Department. He had countless brave subordinates. He even wished the top 6 heroes, I kept in touch with him privately. No one knows where Li Hanshan's appeal comes from. If we really want to find a reason, the most reasonable explanation may be that he is the best in the world. It seems that this is the only thing that people in the world can accept. However, Li Hans Hung is very mysterious. There are no rumors of Li Hans Hung fighting anyone in the world, and there is not even an official portrait. In the court's exaggeration, Li Hanzheng was a wanted criminal, moody, eating people's hearts and so on. But to reach this point, Li Hanzheng is obviously not a lunatic with mental problems. Hearing King Wu's words, Li Hanzheng turned his head and was as polite as when he came to Beijing to take the exam. "My lord, don't worry. You can't avoid what's coming. All you can do is wait and act." Song Siming sighed and thought for a moment, "I still haven't figured out how the boat on the river sank. The most ruthless emperor's family, sometimes when you are a prince, you are far less powerful than you Jianghu people. So carefree." Li Hanzheng chuckled lightly and did not respond. During the chat, footsteps sounded outside the attic. The guard opened the door, and Wang Zuyan, the head of the Wang family in Hangzhou, walked in with a letter in his hand. Li Hanzheng stood in the dark and looked towards the west lake in a blink of an eye. He could only see a back figure. Wang Zuyan quickly walked to King Wu, handed the letter out, and said softly. Quincy asked, and Su Buling seemed to have other uses for the jade. "I'm afraid he won't give it to the prince during his birthday banquet." King Wu took the envelope, opened it and looked at it for a few times, pondered a little, shook his head and said. "What's the use of him, the son of a feudal lord, holding a few small items that people in the world are searching for? Alas." Han Xianchu frowned and thought for a moment, then bowed and said, "Could it be that Su Buling discovered the use of jade?" Wang Zuyan shook his head, "Definitely not. If the use is discovered, King Su's lineage must be hiding the news, or the jade may be sent directly to Chang'an. It is impossible to bring it to Jiangnan with great fanfare." Han Xianchu thought about it. The 4 jade articles he was looking for were too hot to handle. If Su Buling knew the inside story, given the current situation, he would probably want to throw them to King Wu to clear the relationship. King Wu read the letter carefully and then looked at Li Hanzheng. "Su Buletinling said that you can give me a look. If you just take a look, can you find any clues?" Under the dimly lit eaves, Li Hanzheng was silent for a moment and said slowly. "I can't be sure. I'll have to see it to find out." Wang Zuyan put all the chips of the Wang family in Hangzhou on the king of Wu and could not afford to lose anything. He frowned and said. "To make sure nothing goes wrong, we still have to find a way to get the jade. From Kwanzaa's description, the hairpin is on Su Buling's head, but I don't know where the jade pendant is. Since I can show it to the prince, I will definitely bring it with me. Can I find it? Someone with more skill can take it out secretly." While speaking, Wang Zuyan turned his gaze to Li Hanzheng, who was standing in the dark, and his meaning was self-evident. When Councillor Han Xianchu heard this, he shook his head slightly. The prince is not a Jianghu person and does not understand the importance of contemporary King Kui. There is no one in the world who can silently take the hairpin from Su Buling's head. It will inevitably happen in a dispute, someone who can beat Qing Kui. Han Xianchu's eyes also moved to Li Hanzheng. The only person who could beat Qing Kui was a master at the level of Shi Wu Kui. Faced with this proposal, Li Hanzheng rejected it directly. "We can ignore the lineage of King Su, but we must not make enemies with them. We cannot take action." King Wu nodded gently. "Among the 7 kings, the strongest ones are King Su, King Chu, and King Wei. They can all influence the direction of the general situation, so they must not make enemies. But if the jade is not in hand, it will be difficult to carry out the plan for several years." King Wu thought for a while. "First Chu, go and get the Minghong sword, find someone who has nothing to do with me, and bring the sword to exchange the jade. Remember, it's exchange, don't hurt Su Buling. If he dies in my jurisdiction, even if he has nothing to do with me, the emperor will chop me off first to make amends for King Su." It is said that the Minghong sword is a famous sword made of the remaining materials after Huangdi mined copper from Shaoshan and cast Xian Yuan sword. It is not in the weapon list and has only appeared in legends. Hearing that such a heavy weapon was hidden in the hands of King Wu, Even Wang Zhouyin was a little surprised. Han Xianchu thought this method could be tried. It was of sufficient weight. Even if Su Buling didn't want to exchange it, it wouldn't affect the overall situation. However, the explanation given by Yuki to the public was to find the Tongtian treasure book. Those who were interested in the Tongtian treasure book and were willing to exchange it with the rare sword had to be people from the martial arts world, and they couldn't have anything to do with King Wu, and they could also put pressure on Su Buling. The only person who met these conditions in the whole Jiangnan seemed to be Xuechenzi, the gun god, one of the 10 martial arts champions of Daiyue. Thanks to the big boss Huashan Piaoxiahua for the reward of 10,000. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guangguanggongzi. Chapter 438. Snowflakes were flying, and the pavilions of Jinling City were stained with a layer of silver makeup. The cold wind did not dampen the lively atmosphere. The poetry meeting has begun. After several days of warm-up, more and more people have arrived, and many masterpieces have been produced. Today, all the great scholars from Jiangnan will be present, and it is the busiest time. In the afternoon, Su Buling was packing up in the house. Lu Hongluan walked into the house holding her robe and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, I made a new robe for you. Try it to see if it fits you." Lu Hongluan's expression was demure and her words were soft. She had returned to her usual appearance, and she seemed to have forgotten about breaking the taboo in the boudoir the day before yesterday. However, his eyes flickered from side to side, deliberately avoiding Su Buling's gaze, and it was obvious that his heart had not calmed down yet. Perhaps due to the change in her heart, Lu Hongluan no longer wore the lady's clothes. She wore a simple goose yellow long skirt with many peonies embroidered on the skirt. It still retained its original dignity and added a bit of feminine charm. There are flower hairpins in her bun, her skin is smooth and pleasant, and even the lipstick on her lips has been changed to a brighter red. At first glance, she seems to be a different person. Su Buling walked up and caught the carefully sewn white robe. The faint fragrance lingered on the tip of his nose, and there was a bit of smile in his eyes. "Aunt Lu is so beautifully dressed today." Lu Hongluan looked a little cautious, his eyes averted twice, then showed his usual serious expression, and said lightly, "Wear your clothes. I haven't told you about what happened last time. You are lawless and dare to kiss anywhere. You are not allowed to do that again. Don't tell Xiang'er when you go back, otherwise she will definitely laugh at me." Su Buling nodded seriously. "Don't worry, Aunt Lu, she won't dare to laugh at you. Just let you see how I deal with her." "Let me see?" Lu Hongluan frowned slightly, thought about it for a moment, then came back to his senses, and spat softly, "Nonsense, I won't read it. If I were here, Xiang'er would die of shame." After saying this, Mrs. Lu rolled her eyes and seemed to be really moved. Su Buletinling smiled secretly in his heart, shook his head and said nothing more, changing into his robe in front of the bronze mirror. Lu Hongluan stood in front, helping Su Buling put on clothes, thought for a while, and asked, "How is it going with Xiaoqi these 2 days?" The main purpose of Jiangnan's party was to ship Xiaoqi back to Suzhou. There were many opportunities to go to Hangzhou together to spend some time alone. Su Buling was naturally working tirelessly to conquer Xiaoqi these days. Xiaoqi has a strong personality and independent thinking, unlike ordinary girls who are easy to fool. However, as the saying goes, a good girl is afraid of being stalked by a man. Su Buling teased her from morning to night, and came up with all kinds of colorful poems. After 2 days of hard work, Xiaoqi had no choice but to start pretending. Even if you can't hear it, it can be considered progress. Su Buring chuckled lightly, "It's okay. I'll accompany Xiaoqi to the poetry club later. Would you like Aunt Lu to join us?" Mrs. Lu was born in Jiangnan, where the literary style flourished, and she also liked poetry. She often went to poetry fairs when she was a child. However, With Su Buring and Xiao Qi, she would definitely overshadow the guests when she went there. In order not to affect the lifelong event of Bao Bao, she was considerate. Road. You and Xiao Qi go together, why should I go join in the fun? Anyway, I'm so close to you, so I won't blame you if I treat you a little bit badly. I still have to take care of the woman I don't have a good relationship with first, don't you think? Su Buletinling's expression froze slightly, turned around, raised his hand and gave Lu Hongluan a bear hug, lifting Lu Hongluan's feet off the ground. Then I won't go. I'll stay with Aunt Lu today until tomorrow morning. Lu Hongluan was so choked that she couldn't breathe. Her embroidered shoes were dangling in the air. Her eyes were looking around frantically. Your Majesty, are you crazy? Let me down quickly, I'm not upset anymore. It's just a joke. Don't take it seriously. Kunur, are you crazy? Book bar. Su Buling then put her down and started packing her robe again. Mrs. Lu was angry and ashamed, but couldn't blame Su Buling, so she turned around and ran out in a hurry. It was dusk, and the breeze picked up snowflakes, which sprinkled them on the continuous rows of boats. The sound of silk and bamboo could be heard far away in the alley. Su Buling wore a white scholar's robe and came to the vicinity of Jinling Poetry Club. He saw Xiaoting standing outside the library, swinging his folding fan and looking back from time to time, obviously waiting for Xiao Qi. Seeing Su Buletinling coming over, Xiaoting seemed to have been saved. He picked up his robe and ran out. Su Buletinling, you're here just in time. A few friends are waiting over there. I'll go first. You stay with your aunt. Give me an explanation. After saying that, without waiting for permission or rejection, he got into the crowd without looking back. Su Buling naturally had no objection to this, but Xiao Qi, who had just walked downstairs, looked a little colder and gritted her teeth. In the past 2 days, Su Buletinling would come here during the day, and if he had nothing to say, he would find something to say that would make people unable to calm down at all. Xiao Qi could not stop him either by glaring or ignoring him. Her own momentum had no effect on Su Buling, so she had no choice but to let it go. Tonight, she was going to the poetry festival. Xiao Qi specifically asked her nephew to wait outside so that she and Su Buling would not be teased by words when they were alone. But the result was good. Before she could run down, Xiaoting threw her away. Su Buling heard the noise and looked around. Xiao Qi was dressed in men's clothing and put on a black scholar's robe. His hair was tied up with a hairband, and his whole body was spotless. Even his chest was tied up with something unknown. With his naturally aloof and arrogant face, he really looked like an unparalleled young man. The only shortcoming was that he looked too charming and looked a bit, mother. Su Buling walked up to her, glanced at Xiao Qi, and stopped at her flat collar. Kikai, why are you dressed like this? Xiao Qi got angry when she heard this name, and she didn't know how Su Buling came up with it. She walked past Su Buling without looking at him, and replied calmly. I don't want to show up in public, so I dressed up casually. Strictly speaking, she didn't want to show up in public with Su Buling. Most of the families knew that Su Buling came to Huainan to propose marriage. She hadn't publicly stated that she wanted to marry Su Buling. If she dressed up beautifully and walked with Su Buling, wouldn't it mean that she agreed? Su Buling had no objection to this. He walked side by side with Xiao Qi to the Jinling Poetry Society not far away, and said with a smile. I thought hard all night last night and thought of a good poem. Miss Xiao, can you give me some advice? Xiao Qi narrowed her eyes slightly and endured for a long time before she didn't push this handsome man with unpresentable thoughts into the river. She didn't want to continue the topic, and turned her head to look at the sword on Su Buling's waist. A gentleman wears a sword to show his virtue. You are not a gentleman, so why do you carry a sword to show off your elegance? Su Buling didn't care about this literary sarcasm, and smiled. The sword is a ceremonial weapon, which is better than Xiaoting holding a fan in the winter. Xiaoqi held back for a moment, and had nothing to say. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 439. The sky is getting dark, and the Qinhua River is full of people, singing and dancing. The Jinling Poetry Society is very large, with gardens, rock eyries, verandas and pavilions, where young ladies gather in groups to chat. In the main building in the middle, more than 400 people gathered together. There were hundreds of books on the desks and a sea of pens and papers. There were piano tables around the hall. Courtesans took turns to show off their skills. Talents from all over the world showed off their knowledge in one of them. From time to time, there was a burst of admiration. Voice. Dayo was fond of martial arts, and such a large-scale cultural gathering was extremely rare in other places. Compared with the martial arts in Yueyang and other places, it was a completely different world. At this time, in the main building, Du Hui, the prefect of Jinling, Yang Yingxiang with a big belly, and Lu Hongzin, MRS Lu's brother, were all sitting there, and the rest were figures from various major families and gentlemen from the academy. As the legitimate son of the Xiao family in Huainan, Xiaoting had a very transcendent status. He and Wang Ruiyang stood in the middle of the hall talking and laughing. Su Buling took Xiaoqi into the main building. Xiaoqi just came to watch the excitement and had no intention of contacting the local officials and families, so she went directly to the outside of the crowd. The two of them found a seat in a secluded place and sat down. There were so many people and it was difficult for Su Buling to tease Xiaoqi with some naughty jokes, so he acted as calm as before, holding a teacup and remaining silent. Xiaoqi looked a bit like a girl who was dating a boy for the first time. There were people coming and going in front of her, so she might have felt a little embarrassed. She glanced around the crowd and said, "People from aristocratic families from Hangzhou, Jinling, Suzhou and other places came here, and there were also many knowledgeable people. The scholar in Tsingyi was Tang Bailan, a famous talent in Changzhou. He was the official minister of the dynasty, and he was quite famous in Jiangnan. I'm just a bit conceited and too focused on reputation." Su Buling followed his gaze and saw that the scholar named Tang Bailan was talking to Wang Ruiyang. It was obvious that he looked down on Xiaoting in his eyes. It was no wonder that he was named by Xiaoqi. They were all young people, and Su Buling didn't pay attention to the high-spirited scholars. He moved his eyes to the high platform where the judges were sitting, and saw the fat man in the middle who was full of Philistine air, and his eyes were slightly surprised. Xiaoqi was extremely smart, so she could naturally tell what Su Buling was surprised about, and explained softly. "That's Yang Yingxiang. To hold such a large poetry gathering, it would cost a lot of money just to ask the Warren to help. Yang Yingxiang is very enthusiastic about this. He is always rushing to pay for it. Several big households in Jinling will naturally give a few split thin noodles." Su Buling nodded and joked, "Does this count as taking from the people and using it for the people?" Xiaoqi snorted lightly. Yang Yingxiang used rogue methods to plunder and forced many poor people to death. How can the money used to entertain these useless scholars and warrens be used for the people? It's a pity. You could only give Yang Yingxiang a warning last time. With the king of Wu as his support, he will still run rampant as soon as we leave." Xiaoqi said this with a bit of helplessness in her eyes. The relationships between the aristocratic families are intricate and there are too many places for evil and evil to hide. As the head of the family, Xiaoqi can only consider the interests of the family. She knew that there was a famine in the countryside, but the only thing she could do was give out food and relief. If she wanted to completely solve all the problems, she would have to bloodbath the entire Jiangnan to break down the class solidification. She didn't even have the ability to do that today. Perhaps because she didn't want to talk more about this issue, Xiao Qi focused her attention on the Warren playing the piano and singing next to her. The courtesan, who was dressed in a gorgeous dress, was singing the song "The Wind Abides in the Dust and the Fragrance of the Flowers is Gone," which was popular throughout the south of the Yangtze River. The wind abides by the dust and the fragrance of the flowers is gone. I am tired of combing my hair at night. Things are different and people are different. Let's stop everything. If I want to speak, I will shed tears first. The singing voice is light and moving, and the singing is beautiful. It is a pity that the Warren is sought after by many talented people. Without the experience of things are different and people are different, everything is over. It is impossible to sing the sad mood in the lyrics. Xiao Qi liked this poem very much. After listening to it for a moment, she smiled and said, "Su Buling, did you write this poem for Xiang'er or Hongluan?" Su Buling felt a little embarrassed when he mentioned this, raised his hand and said, "Copied." "Who copied it?" "Li Qingzhao's number 6. Li Qingzhao, sounds like a woman." Xiao Qi squinted her eyes slightly and went through all the famous talented women in Dayou in her mind. She couldn't find a suitable candidate and asked curiously, "What does that girl look like? What does she have to do with you?" Su Buletinling gently spread his hands, his eyes showing a bit of lovelessness. In the past, Xiang'er and Aunt Lu also liked to ask questions, but how could he answer this? Seeing that Su Buling was unwilling to say anything, Xiao Qi snorted slightly and turned her head to look away, obviously a little dissatisfied. She hadn't agreed to marry Su Buling, yet she was so dishonest. If she really married Su Buling, she would be treated like a polished princess who couldn't interfere in anything. Su Buling had a headache when he saw this. He was secretly thinking of a reasonable excuse when a call suddenly came from the hall. "I heard that Prince Su also came to the poetry meeting. Tang has long admired his name. I wonder if Prince Su can show up to meet him." Su Buling frowned slightly when he heard the sound, and looked up, only to see Tang Bailin standing with Xiao Ting, looking for him in the crowded hall. Earlier, when Su Buling and Xiao Qi were chatting about Li Qingzhao, the center of the hall where many talented people and beauties gathered their attention also focused on the Warren's singing voice. Wang Ruiyang was chatting with many talented people, and they all talked a lot. Xiao Ting couldn't get in the middle of the conversation. It happened that the person singing the song was his favorite Warren girl Ruchuanzi, so he said slightly proudly, "When the song Wind Blows Away the Dust and the Fragrant Flowers Are Gone appeared, I happened to be present. You may have heard of the lyricist. I was a classmate and friend of the Imperial Academy, the Prince Su Wang, Su Buling. At that time, he wrote this poem. Originally it was "Comb your hair when you are tired every night," but later it was changed to "Comb your hair when you are tired every night." 7 or 8 well-known talents from Jiangnan froze when they heard this. Even Wang Ruiyang looked slightly embarrassed and didn't know how to answer this. There is a world of difference between combing your hair and combing your cage. How could someone who could write this poem be confused? However, Xiao Ting's identity was placed here, and no one dared to question it. They just nodded lightly, showing some admiration. Tang Bailin, one of the many talented people, also came from a scholarly family and had a hard relationship with the court. He did not like Xiao Ting, who was weak-minded, and said softly, "From what my tutor said, Prince Su seems to have admitted that the poems were copied. Jiangnan has a strong literary culture. Buying and stealing poems is a matter of being beaten up, especially in Jiangnan. It doesn't matter if a prince, noble son, or noble son buys poems to gain some limelight at a poetry festival, but if he really shows off as a talented person afterwards, don't blame others for looking down upon him." However, it has not yet been determined whether Su Buling's poems were plagiarized, because no target of plagiarism has been found. Several talented people knew that Tang Bailin had real talent and knowledge and hated plagiarism, so they said. Prince Su may be just being humble and didn't admit it directly. Xiaoting also nodded, yes, Su Buletinling is here. If you talk nonsense, I will kill you with a knife. I can't stop you. As soon as these words came out, all the talented people were stunned for a moment, and their eyes showed a bit of joy. They didn't expect Su Buring to come here today. Tang Bailin had heard about Su Buling's talent for a long time, and he immediately looked around. Oh, since Crown Prince Su is here, why didn't he show up? Brother Xiao, can you recommend someone to us? Xiao Ting knew that Su Buling was spending time with his aunt, and he was eager to marry her off, so he definitely didn't want to interrupt. He shook his head and said, you can just yell no if you want, but if he beats you, don't blame me. Tang Bailin had heard rumors that Su Buling killed people without blinking an eye, but the literati had a sense of arrogance. With so many princes and nobles present, they were not worried that Su Buling would degrade himself and use violence, so he shouted. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 440. The poetry club was packed with hundreds of talented scholars and beauties, and servants kept carrying trays to deliver poems to several great scholars for review. Yang Yingxiang sat in the middle. When the manuscript was passed around, he would carefully touch his chin and look at it for a long time, then nod gently. Perhaps because he had heard and seen it for a long time, he could occasionally give a few comments, which attracted a few compliments from the people below. Jinling Prefect Du Hui was born in a poor family. He had been an official in Jinling for many years and had some reputation. It was a pity that Jinling was too close to King Wu and too far from Chang'an. Being a prefect here, you must look at King Wu's face, and you have to say a few polite words to the lawless Yang next to you. However, the one who really has the most transcendent status must be Lu Hongxin sitting on the right. He is the eldest son of the Jinling Lu family. Regardless of seniority, he is more noble than Xiaoqi. It's just that the Jinling Lu family has not been valued by Songji in the court in recent years, and the family style has always been low-key and easygoing. Lu Hongxin did not argue with Yang Yingxiang, who has the background of King Wu, on such an insignificant seat issue. Under the star-studded moon, Yang Yingxiang looked quite good and occasionally chatted with Lu Hongxin. It's not that they were discussing anything, but simply liked the feeling of talking to Lu Hongxin on an equal footing. If you don't understand Yang Yingxiang's thoughts, you can refer to Tang Jiao of the Yuzhu Tang family's reaction when he met Xiaoqi. The head of the four great sword-learning families was scolded like a dog by Xiaoqi, and he had to swallow his anger. It can be imagined how strong the sense of accomplishment is to be able to communicate on an equal footing with the Xiao Lu Kui Wang Li families. Normally, in such a literary occasion, Yang Yingxiang would just sit there and wait for it to end, but today, not long after the poetry gathering began, a sentence below attracted the attention of everyone present. I heard that Prince Su is also attending the poetry gathering. I have long heard of your name. I wonder if Prince Su can show up and see me. The hall was originally noisy, but Tang Bailin had a high status among many talented people and a loud voice. For a moment, everyone stopped talking and looked at the center of the hall. When he heard Su Buling's name, Yang Yingxiang narrowed his eyes slightly, pondered for a while, and still smiled a little. Mr. Lu, Prince Su is here today. Lu Hongxin is Lu Hongluan's biological brother, and he is only in his early 30s this year. Hearing Yang Yingxiang's question, he responded with a casual expression. My sister is taking care of it, I don't know. Yang Yingxiang nodded slowly and moved his eyes to the hall again. There were more than 400 people gathered in the hall, all dressed as literati, and it was not easy to find someone. Everyone present had heard of the three poems, and had also heard about the murder in Nanshan port a few days ago. Seeing Su Buling was there today, they all looked around with curiosity. Xiaoqi was sitting in a secluded place. Seeing this, She whispered, "Go by yourself. I won't show up." Su Buling tapped the armrest of the chair with his fingers and looked at Yang Yingxiang. "Do you need me to get rid of harm for the people?" Xiao Qi frowned slightly, with a little confusion in her eyes. How to get rid of it? Instead of answering whether it was necessary or not, but asking how to get rid of it, Su Buling understood the meaning, stood up, and walked to the center of the hall. "Prince Su. See the little prince. So handsome." Ran Wen. As Su Buling stood up from the corner, there was a little noise in the hall. Many talented women sneaked in to see if Dao's Zhao Hongyimei was as graceful as the rumors said. The nearby scholars raised their hands to greet and get close to him. Yang Yingxiang looked at Su Buling and looked at him for a few times. He nodded slightly and showed his appreciation, just like an elder looking at a promising junior. However, there was some truth and falsehood in his expression, which was intriguing. The bustling crowd parted, and Su Buling came to the center of the hall and said calmly, "Mr. Tang called me." Tang Balin raised his hand and made a scholar's salute. "I have heard of the name of the prince for a long time. Today, I see that he is indeed extraordinary. Just now, we were talking about the prince's poems and we were all impressed by his poetry. However, when the prince was in Chang'an, he said that he did not write them himself, but there is no one else in the world who can write those poems. Since the prince has come to the poetry meeting today, why don't you and I make friends with literature and let many classmates present be convinced?" Tang Balin called Su Buling out for a natural purpose of competing with him. He was already very famous in Jiangnan, but since Su Buling's poems were spread, he was suppressed invisibly. Now that they have met, they have to compete no matter what. After all, losing doesn't matter, but winning means you will be famous. The many talented men and beautiful women present also showed some eagerness in their eyes when they heard this. They came to the poetry meeting to watch the great talents compete openly and secretly and show their talents. But just when everyone was looking forward to it, and even Xiao Qi picked up the teacup and looked at her future husband seriously, Su Buling showed an unhappy expression and said in a cold voice, "Are you worthy?" The voice was not loud and the tone was flat, but the whole audience was silent for a moment, and then looked stunned. Xiao Ting shrugged his shoulders, with a strange look in his eyes, as if to say, "Look, I'll tell you, let you make yourself uncomfortable, Su Buling has beaten more people in Chang'an than you have ever seen." Tang Balin's smile froze, and he was stunned for a long time before he was sure that he had heard it right, and his face flushed instantly. "If you don't want to agree, then don't agree. Why talk like that in public without even giving me a way out? It's purely to embarrass me." But Tang Balin couldn't respond. He couldn't say anything back when a prince of a vassal king said something unreasonable. It would be insulting and he couldn't beat him. He could only smile awkwardly and turn his eyes to the great scholars sitting above him, hoping that the elders could speak up to help him out. The poetry club became quiet, and hundreds of people looked at each other in bewilderment. The expressions of the more than 10 scholars sitting above were not very good. If the students from Jiangnan were so rampant, they would be driven out on the spot. But Su Buling was the prince of Suwang. These teachers were not Su Buling's teachers, so it would be difficult for them to discipline him. The prefect Du Hui was a government official, and he dared not offend Suwang, and his weight was far from enough. He could only look at Lu Hongxin sitting next to him. Lu Hongxin is the eldest son of the Lu family, and has some relationship with Su Buling. When the head of the Lu family is not around, he can control Su Buling. He can just say, "Buling, don't be so presumptuous." The awkward situation will be relieved, and everyone can just pretend that nothing has happened. But for some reason, Lu Hongxin didn't even look at the center of the hall, concentrating on appreciating the poem in his hand, like an outsider. If Lu Hongxin didn't come out to settle the matter, the scene would suddenly become stiff, and everyone turned their eyes to Yang Yingxiang, who was sitting in the middle. This poetry meeting was led by Yang Yingxiang, and he is also the brother-in-law of King Wu. Logically, he should be qualified to speak.